Now, urinary system is almost the opposite side of the coin, because we just got done with the digestive system, which has lots of different organs spread out over all different places, etc. And so it's kind of complex that way. Now, structurally, the urinary system is pretty simple instead. So when we look at it, like in these two images here, we can see it's made up of kidneys, two kidneys, hopefully, two ureters that drain the urine from the kidney, a bladder that stores the urine, and then a urethra that's going to drain the urine from the bladder to the outside. That is pretty simple, right? Now, where it gets a little bit more complex is actually what's going on inside of the kidney in order to make that urine. Okay? So that's where we'll spend a lot of our time when we're discussing the urinary system. These other organs are really pretty simple. I mean, ureter is kind of like the esophagus. It just transports something from up there down to there. That's it. No absorption, no digestion. If you're talking about, digestive system, etc., it's just transporting it from the kidney down to the bladder. The bladder doesn't do anything but hold it. There are some organisms that have very specialized bladders that are adapted for living in the desert and stuff like that can actually absorb fluid like water back from the urine while it's sitting in the bladder. Okay, there's certain species of frogs and stuff like that can do that. Not us. Once it exits the kidney, we are done with it. We can't do anything with it. We can store it, but there's no more, I forgot I got to get this out of it before we lose it, etc. Right? It's done at that point. So ureter taken from the kidney down to the bladder. Bladder holds it for as long as you want or as long as you can, and then the urethra is going to drain it when convenient. Okay? Okay. So we said that the other organs of the urinary system are pretty simple. That means that the urinary kidneys are going to have to be kind of complex. Now, when we look at the kidneys, and if you ever see them like in the meat department or something like that, you go to that section of the meat department where they have lots of organs and things, you're going to go over there more often now to check things out. So, when you look at the kidneys themselves, they stay pretty solid. I mean, they look like meat, they look like muscle, they look like they're just kidneys, right? But what we'll find, like you see in this figure here, is that if you zoom up on the internal structure of the kidney, there's this whole series of tubules, mini tubes inside of them. That the whole thing is actually made up of tubules. And much like when we saw the digestive system, where we had the small intestine, where it's all about surface area. The longer we're in the tube, the more we can do with whatever's in the tube. That applies here as well. So in those tubules, what we're going to have is what's called filtrate. It's going to be fluid and things that are dissolved within the fluid that we pulled out of the blood. But as it's going through all this series of tubules, we have a chance, a bit like the digestive system, to, for instance, absorb things out of it or secrete more things in it that we want to get rid of, etc. So it has to go through that whole series of tubes so that we have a chance to really kind of tweak it to make sure that what's in it that we want to get rid of, we've been able to put in it, and anything that we want to get back from it, we've had a chance to do so. Okay? So, when we look inside the kidney, it's a whole bunch of these tubules. And when we look at it, right, see this whole thing right here? This thing that we see on the right here, that whole little unit right there is called a nephron. And we'll come back to that as well. N-E-P-H-R-O-N. That's a nephron. So the nephron is the structural and functional unit of the kidney, of the urinary system. The nephron is about 1 million of these per kidney. Okay? So we've got about 1 million of these that are doing the work of the urinary system, actually making urine. And so we've got to look inside of those to see how that actually occurs. All right, so that's where we're going to zoom down to like we usually do. Before we do, we want to just kind of take a look at the macroscopic view, the big scale view of the kidneys, to remind ourselves that the kidneys themselves, we said that we have 2 of them. They're actually located on the posterior body wall. So they're partially protected by the ribs and partially not. Excuse me, partially not. They have a kidney bean shape, right? That's where the name comes from. We can see where the ureter exits them like that. And you can also see that they have a very good vascular system. anytime you see renal, okay, renal is going to refer to kidney. So you've got renal failure or something like that, it's kind of a kidney failure. So we've got a renal artery coming in, we've got a renal vein going out, and we're going to have a lot of different types of blood vessels inside of it there. So here, we've really taken kind of a zoom out view. We can see our two kidneys, and like I said, they're partially protected by those floating ribs, those last couple of ribs there. But they have a kind of a fat pad that helps to surround them. On top of each one, we've got an adrenal gland that's totally separate, just happens to be located with the kidneys, and they're called what's called retroperitoneal. So retro, right, means back behind, and peritoneal or peritoneum refers to the serous membrane that lines that abdominal pelvic cavity. Now, most of the organs are inside of it, but the kidneys are actually back behind it, as well as the pancreas and some sections of the intestine and stuff like that. So that serous membrane that lines that whole cavity in the back, it's almost like a curtain that comes down, and you can imagine these kidneys sitting behind that curtain. Okay? Now notice that the left kidney sits higher than the right kidney. Any idea why that might be? And that's the case for most everybody. So what's that largest internal organ we were just talking about? Liver. The liver sits on the right side, kind of like that. So the liver is big enough that it actually depresses that right kidney. There's enough room for it to sit as high as up on the left kidney. So the right kidney tends to be down lower than the left kidney because of that liver. Okay, so we saw that it has a kidney V shape, right? It has a depression in the inside, which leads to what's called the renal sinus, and that's where all the blood vessels and nerves and ureter are going to be inside of the kidney like that. All right, so let's take a look then in terms of broad scale view, what the kidneys and the urinary system are going to be doing. So, if you ask kind of Joe or Jill on the street, they probably tell you that the kidneys and the urinary system kind of filter the blood, right? They filter out waste products out of the blood. And to be sure, that's a decent description of it. But what we'll find is that filtration, and we talked about filtration a bit before, we were talking about capillaries, right? When the fluids were going out to the tissues, it was having to kind of push through the wall of the capillary, much like coffee was going through a coffee filter. Same thing's going to happen here in the kidneys, and so we are going to filter things out of the blood. But the filtration process is a size-selective process. So just like in the coffee filter, big things stay in and small things pass through. So obviously, like we were talking about, blood cells and big plasma proteins and stuff like that, they're going to stay in the blood, but water molecules and small ions and even small molecules are going to get filtered out. Now, some of those small molecules are things that we actually want, like glucose, like sodium, etc. Like even, in some cases, water. We actually filter out much more water than we can afford to lose. And so, when we're filtering that stuff out, after it gets filtered, we go through all those tubules, and that's where we have a chance to pull those things back. We just got done talking about a system where we spent all this time and surface area and effort breaking down things like carbohydrates to get small enough to glucose so we can give it to the cells, and now the kidneys are going to filter it out. We're going to lose it that way. That's not going to be very efficient. So if that filtration is going to be the first step of producing urine, we're going to have to have other processes that are going to make sure that we get that back again. So we'll talk about that too. But the kidneys are going to regulate the volume, composition, and pH of the body fluids, right? So volume, right? We want to make sure that there's not too much blood or too little blood floating around in the blood vessels. Likewise, the tissues, the intra and extracellular fluid, we got to keep that in balance. Composition, that means not only volume in terms of how much, but what's in there. Like we said, we want to make sure that we don't lose our glucose and things like that. So we want to get rid of waste products and excess things, but then we want to retain the things that we need. And then pH, right? We can, in fact, control the number of hydrogen ions that are going to be floating around in our fluids. Okay, so we're going to control bodily fluids. We're going to remove metabolic waste products from the blood as well. So what they're going to do, in addition to that, is there also going to be a point where we can release a couple hormones or enzymes that control other processes. So if the kidneys are constantly looking at the blood and tweaking the blood and changing and stuff like that, if the blood is off in some way, like its own composition, that balance between plasma and cells, the kidneys are going to know about it because that's all their job is to control the blood, the composition of the blood, etc. So erythropoietin is a hormone that's released by the kidneys, right? Erythro means red. That's the hormone that tells the bone marrow to produce more red blood cells. So the kidneys see it getting off in terms of composition, we're getting anemic or something like that, they will send a signal back to the red bone marrow. The red bone marrow will jack up the production of red blood cells. Renin, or renin, that you see there, is also important in terms of regulating blood volume and blood pressure. So what renin does ultimately is it will work to increase blood pressure and blood volume. You know, your BV is going to go off the screen there. Okay, so it increases blood pressure and blood volume. It causes the release of a hormone called aldosterone. Now, we didn't go through the endocrine system, well, we went through it fairly quickly, okay? And aldosterone is a hormone that tells the kidneys to reabsorb more sodium. And so just like eating a salty bag of potato chips, when you retain sodium, the water follows because of the osmotic gradient, osmotic pressure. So you put the sodium on that side of the membrane and the water goes, hey, there's a lot of him over there and not a lot of me. So I'm going to follow it until the concentrations on either side of the membrane are about equal. So if we retain sodium, then the water follows and we can work to increase our blood pressure if it gets too low. So that's going to come into play, like if we get dehydrated or something like that. Okay? So aldosterone will become activated. Antidiuretic hormone, no P hormone, will also become activated to work to make sure that our blood pressure is maintained. Okay, so like I said, when we look inside of the kidney, we're going to have a lot of different blood vessels going into it. This just shows kind of the flow of the different leading into and out of the kidneys that we see here. And you'll find that if you look at the exam objectives for these last two systems, you'll see that it's just like a lot of tracing, meaning, again, that you would follow the pathway of something through the different organs or tubes of that system. So the digestive system, you can trace, the double you ate through the alimentary canal, and then you're going along, you say, okay, I reach the stomach. What does the stomach do? Well, it adds intestine to digest protein or something like that. And then I get to duodenum. You're drawing an arrow, duodenum. And then you talk about duodenum where, enzymes of the pancreas come in and bile from the liver and the gallbladder come in and stuff like that. For the urinary system, you can do tracings to help you understand it. You can do tracings with the blood vessels, for instance, tracing blood from the time that it comes into the kidney until it goes all the way out here to where the nephrons are, where a water molecule might get filtered out. The veins basically have the same pathway. If you look at it, right, there's going to be a renal artery and a renal vein. There's going to be a arcuate artery and an arcuate vein, like you see here, etc. So you could do a tracing out of the blood vessels so that you can kind of see where these blood vessels go. You can also do a tracing of the urine, or just basically with water getting filtered out, right? So if water gets filtered out way out here at the nephron, then you can trace as it goes through the different parts of the nephron, ultimately exiting the kidney through that ureter and going down to the bladder and going down to the urethra, etc. So, I would worry about it. It's important to realize that the kidneys have a lot of blood vessels because they're dealing with blood on a day-to-day basis. Not only to keep them alive, but they have a job to do on the blood. So they have a big amount of blood going to them on a day-to-day basis, and hour to hour, minute to minute. But I wouldn't worry about, at least for blood, having to do a blood tracing like we see here. Just realize that we start out with some really large blood vessels like this, and you can see that they're working their way out here toward the outer part of the kidney. Like the brain, right? The outer part of the kidney is called the cortex, and the inner part of the kidney is called the medulla, okay? So those nephrons, like we keep talking about, are mostly located out here in the cortex. So So in order to work their magic on the blood has to get out to the cortex out there. Okay, so you see the zoomed in section, this little kind of rectangle that we see there? It's showing us the location of that nephron. And here's a zoomed up picture of the nephron right there. And you can see a nephron has both what's called tubular components and vascular components. So the point is, if we're going to filter out some water, say we just drank too much water, we need to get it out of the blood. Because if we take in a bunch of water, right, and it gets absorbed in the small intestine, and it goes into the blood, well, the blood volume is just going to go up and up and up. And now you've got too much blood volume that's increasing blood pressure. It's putting a strain on all your arteries and veins and the heart and stuff like that. Remember, it's all about homeostasis. We want to maintain around a set point. We don't want anything too high or anything too low. So if we're taking in lots of fluid, we need to put out lots of fluid as well. Okay? So if we filter it out, it's going to filter out in a capillary bed that's inside of the kidney. It's called the glomerulus, and we'll see that coming up. Okay? And once that water comes out, as well as these other ions and small molecules, it's going to go through these series of tubules, like you see those windy ones going around, where it says proximal convoluted tubule, and there's a nephron loop there and all this stuff. But notice that all those yellow tubules have blood vessels around them still. And so what that does is it gives us a chance to be able to, like I said, tweak, take out, or put in into the what we call the filtrate throughout all of that nephron there. So it gives us a chance to reabsorb things. Like you said, if that glucose got filtered out at first, and now it's in the filtrate, we're going to lose it. All of those blood vessels that are wrapping the tubule there give us a chance to reabsorb it and put it back into the bloodstream. So the nephron, like we see there, is necessarily going to have the tubular component where the filtrate that's been filtered out is going to be moving along, trying to get towards the ureter and stuff like that so we can get rid of it. But we're also going to have these capillary beds all around the tubular segment so that we can pull and reabsorb things from it or secrete things into it to make sure that the filtrate is not just things that got filtered out that maybe were so small they came out, but they're actually the things that we want to get rid of, right? So we're going to pull back things that we don't want to lose. We're going to secrete more things into there that we'd like to get rid of. And by the time we get through this little tubular segment here, we're going to finally get to this end, like you see here, the collecting tubule. By the time we get to that, we're going to get to what's called urine. But all throughout this, it's a bit like the intestine, like we talked about the digestive system. We're moving through these segments and we're doing things to it and making sure that by the time we get to the end of it, it's just waste products instead. Okay, so like you said, we've got 1 million of these nephrons per kidney, and when we look at them, they're going to have both a tubular and a vascular component. So here's a big zoomed up view here. And you see, let me see if I can circle it brightly here. Right here, so you see that circle right there? There's a big ball of capillaries right there, okay? And that ball of capillaries right there is called a glomerulus. And so the capillaries, like we talked about in the cardiovascular system, were the point where we were doing exchange, right? Where we were having things go out to the tissues, leaving the capillary, and by the end of the capillary, we were bringing things back. These capillaries are specialized ones. It's a place where things can leave the cardiovascular system, just like we talked about other capillaries. But in these capillaries, called the glomerulus, all we want to do is filtration. We just want things to leave the blood. We want to get it out. We want to filter it, just like a coffee filter. That glomerulus is the coffee filter. Okay? So that ball of capillaries right there is the filter, and things that leave it are going to be caught in a yellow, in terms of this figure, capsule around it that's called the glomerular capsule. So the glomerular capsule is going to be this ball that's around it. It's a bit like if you want to think about the coffee pot, right? It catches all that stuff that's getting filtered out. Okay, so when we look at it, let me see if I can get to a picture here. Here's a zoom up of it right here, okay? So here's a little box right here, and we're zoomed up on it right there, okay? So there's that ball of capillaries. We have an afferent arteriole. Let me get an arrow again. We have an afferent arteriole coming into it, just like the cardiovascular system. Arteriole leading to a capillary bed, right? And the afferent arteriole leads into it. Then we have the capillary bed. And in the capillary bed, that's where all of our filtration is going to occur. So all that yellow pee, if you will, is getting filtered out there, and it gets collected by that glomerular capsule that you see out here. Okay, that's the coffee pot collecting. And now, that filtrate gets drawn off this way, and the rest of the blood that didn't get filtered out goes out the efferent arteriole. Okay? But that's where our first very critical step of the formation of urine occurs. Filtration occurs there at the glomerulus. We filter things out of the blood. Okay? Now this picture down below here is a scanning electron micrograph where you can see there's that kind of winding knot of capillary that we call the glomerulus. And then here is the glomerular capsule. That's where all the filtration gets caught. That's the coffee pot itself right there. Okay? Okay, so let me get rid of my little drawing there. Now after that filtrate gets caught in the glomerular capsule, it starts going through this whole segment. I have to change degrees so you can see it. It's going to go through this little segment here, which is called the proximal convoluted tubule. It's called proximal because it's close to where the glomerulus is, right? Proximal means close, right? And then convoluted just means that it winds back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Okay? So that's the proximal convoluted tubule. Then it goes into this long loop here, which is called the nephron loop. Sometimes called loop fiddling. Then it goes to a distal convoluted tubule like you see here. And then finally it's going to dump into this last segment, which is called the collecting tubule. But it's while it's in that tubular system there, where we're going to tweak, if you will, tweak the recipe of that filtrate. Be pulling things out of it that we want back, be screening more things into it, etc. Okay? So what we'll find is that there are three different critical processes that are going to go on here. That's what we see right here. The first one is glomerular filtration that occurs right there, glomerulus. See that arrow coming out? That's where those things are getting filtered out of the blood. The second and third things, though, are equally important compared to filtration. Number one is called tubular reabsorption. See how we're absorbing it from the tubule and putting it back into the capillaries around it, back into the blood. Okay? That's called tubular reabsorption. We call it reabsorption because we absorb it first in the digestive system, right? In the small intestine. That's what we absorbed the first time. We absorbed that water, or we absorbed that glucose, etc. Now, we're in danger of losing it. So we've got to get it back. We're reabsorbing it. Because like I said, filtration is side-selective. That filtration doesn't care whether it's something you want. It just cares if it's small enough to pass through those holes of the filter. Okay? So tubular reabsorption is where we're spending time and effort getting it back. And then lastly, we have what's called tubular secretion. So if there's substances that we didn't get filtered out totally, we want to push some more into that filtrate so we can feed them out. We will kind of use ATP and active transport, and we'll push them from the blood into the filtrate. We'll secrete them into the tubule so that we can pass them out of the body later on as urine. Okay? So those are the three critical processes that are going to be occurring inside of the nephron and inside of the kidney in order to successfully make urine. That filtration is only the first step. The filtration that occurs, there's so much filtration that occurs, we filter about 125 milliliters per minute, okay? Now, 125 milliliters, if we just round this down to like 100 milliliters, right? 100 milliliters times 10 gives us up to a liter, right? 100 milliliters times 10 up to a liter. How many liters of blood do we have? About 5. Anywhere from 4 to 6 liters, depends on how big you are, stuff like that. You've only got 5 liters of blood in you. If we're able every minute to filter 100 milliliters, right? So 5, we're dividing by 5, getting down to a liter, we're dividing that by 10, right? It wouldn't take, it would take like an hour, and we actually filter through all the blood that we have, and we'd be like this dry hot, and we'd be peeing out all the fluid from the blood. So, obviously that's going to be a bad thing. That just shows us how critical that reabsorption process is going to be. The filtration just goes along doing what it's supposed to do. If it's small, it drops through the filter. I don't have any control over that. If it's small, it gets through. I don't care if you want it or not. If you want it, you better go get it. And that's what the rest of that tubule is going to be for reabsorbing things back like water, like glucose, like amino acids and stuff like that, and then secreting other things that maybe you want to get rid of even more. Okay? Okay. So that's what we're going to be kind of looking at as we finish up the urinary system. Now let me not show you again. Let me show you kind of those things in kind of a moving form, if you will. Let me do this. Go back. Our people at home. Chance to see what we're seeing. Interesting. Yeah, now you'll see it. Okay. And let me show you this movie here from the kidney. Alright, so let's get try to kind of bring it all together in terms of what we've been seeing. Start at the big level, and then work our way down to the microscopic level. Now, the audio is not really important, but at the beginning here, it shows the people that are, kind of ingesting things, and at the time when they finish ingesting these things they need, they have some waste product left over. So she's considering what she needs to do is get rid of the waste product after she's taken what she needs from that particular meal. And so the urinary system is doing the same thing. It's trying to get rid of what you don't need and then hold on to what you do. And here are 3 different processes that we talked about, right? So here's the glomerulus. That's not a capillary where filtration is going to occur. The atrial arteriole leads into it, then there's capillaries where we do the filtration, the eternal arteriole takes any fluid away, okay, like the blood. Here is how we see that filtration occurring, right? See these little slits? It's like a colander, like a sieve. Big things, like big molecules and cells, stay in. Small things, like small molecules and ions, get filtered out. They get collected by the surrounding glomerular capsule or Bowman's capsule. Okay? But there's so much of this that's filtered out that we actually need to hold on to. We need those other 2 processes to be working all the time as well. Okay? Alright, let me show you one other thing in terms of processes here. I'll take you to run straight from it. I don't know that first one second. And again, this is just going to highlight all 3 of those processes again. It's kind of like a sliding filament mechanism, right? If you don't know how the sliding filament mechanism works, actin and myosin, the whole overlapping, hand-over-hand motion, you can't understand how muscles contract, okay? This is how the urinary system works. Because those other organs, like the ureters and the bladder and the urethra, it's just holding it, right? This is where the process of urine occurs. So this is just going to show us that same type of thing, right? So here, the atrial arteriole, with the blood coming in, is something we want to filter out. So you can see that actually about 20% of the fluid that comes into the glomerulus gets filtered out and starts going through the tubular system. About 80% of it just continues on. Of that material that we filter through, like water, we're going to reabsorb some of that back, right? You leave in the tubule, we put it back in the blood, and then we're retaining it. And for water, that can be as high as 99% of the water that gets filtered, we actually reabsorb back. Instead, we get dried up toxic if we didn't do that. But the other process that's going to go on is tubular secretion. So maybe some of it gets filtered out, but not enough. We want to actually push even more from the capillaries into the tubules so that we can get rid of it in the urine. So that part is also going to be very critical. So we can get rid of excess hydrogen ions, waste products, etc. So that is what's going on in the nephron, right? The filtration is occurring, the reabsorption is occurring, and the secretion is occurring all together, so that by the end, we're getting rid of only what we want to get rid of. Okay? Now, that's going to be variable as well, as we talk about when you get dehydrated or overhydrated or whatever. But those three processes are critical. You got to know those three: filtration, reabsorption, and secretion. Okay? Okay, so we'll pick up from there next time, and we keep talking about how the kidney does this big job for your urinary system. So tomorrow, make sure that you have your reproductive system notes as well. If we have folks who start that as well to get